Recently, I have been obsessed with a certain type of content, and that is challenge runs. There's something engaging about watching someone play through a game with some kind of limiter. And while a lot of these challenge runs I've been watching have been SMT, Persona, and Pokemon games, I'm not a big enough of a masochist to put myself through that kind of hell. I could barely beat Nocturne on normal, so I am not built for that. But I did want to do some kind of challenge run, so I took a gander at my game shelf and I found the perfect game, Majora's Mask. Now, I have a long history with Majora's Mask, and one that I won't get into here, but I'll just say it is my favorite Zelda game and just my favorite game in general. So it is the perfect game to torture myself with. So now all I need is a challenge. It is pretty well known that Majora's Mask is the most challenging 3D Zelda game, other than, I guess, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I would argue that most of it is because of time management. And while I could try to do one of those few cycle runs, I am not a speedrunner and it has already been done many times. So let's try to do something different. What is Majora's Mask most known for? Probably its side quests. Majora's Mask has the most side quests you can find in any pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda game, and some of them give heart pieces like usual, but also some give masks and upgrades that eventually make the final boss easier. So here is the challenge I came up with. No side quests at all, only 3 hearts, no healing items, limited saves, and I have to reset on death. This forces me to only do the main quest, never heal, and think about each and every encounter carefully. But what exactly constitutes a side quest? I would say it is anything that has almost no impact on the main story of the game, so that means every single mask that isn't a transformation mask is off the tables, along with any extra bottles, heart containers, and any other optional items. I will also rule out anything that will get recorded on the Bomber's Notebook that isn't connected to the main quest, such as shooting galleries, bomb galleries, and the treasure hunt minigame. I am also ruling out the Lost Fairies and the dungeons, as that is considered a side quest and grants optional items. And last but not least, I will not be allowed to upgrade my sword at Snowhead. Now, the other part of the challenge is the minimum health part. I will be forced to have 3 hearts the entire game, and on top of that, I will not be allowed to heal myself with any healing items. Meaning I will only ever be able to heal when I use the Song of Time. If I do accidentally heal somehow, I will be forced to reset to my last save. And speaking of saves, let's also lay out the ground rules for saving. I will only be allowing a limited amount of saving. My first save will be right after the intro, and then after, I will only be allowed to save before and after dungeons, with a minor exception for Iconic Canyon and Castle, but we'll get to that later. But that means if I successfully get through the build-up in the area before a dungeon, I am allowed to save and inadvertently heal, and this goes for when I finish the dungeon. Lastly, when I die, I must reset and start from my last save again. This is because when you die, you get put at the entrance of where you died. For example, if I die in a dungeon, the game will put me right at the start of the dungeon, but all the progress I made so far will be saved, and because of this, I will have to reset after each death. With these rules, I deemed that it was best that I do it on the N64 version of the game, and also because Citra is dead now, so thanks Nintendo. This is because the only way to have a permanent save in the N64 version is to use the Song of Time to reset the cycle. This is convenient for the run, as then I will have no other way to have a permanent save, and I will be limited to completing the area within the cycle. That being said, I'm not too worried about running out of time. If you know the game as well as I do, then it should take like a day max to get through the dungeons. And that paired with the reverse Song of Time should make the time limit the least of my worries. And last but most obviously, no cheats and no save states. And with all the setup and introductory information out of the way, it's time to start the run. Okay, before I start, I just want to say that I already did this run up to the point before entering Woodfall Temple, and guess what? Streamlabs recorded nothing, like nothing at all. Look at this shit. I have 2 hours of footage where I already did a bit of the challenge, and you're telling me that it didn't record a single second. Like, all it recorded was just a blank frame from the game and nothing else. And it turns out when you try to record Project 64 while using window capture and it's in full screen, it just doesn't work. So that's 2 hours wasted. But at least I didn't get too far, I guess, but it's still really shitty. But anyway, when I make sure the game is actually recording this time, I start the run up. The game starts as usual with Link wandering around a forest looking for Navi until he gets jumped by Skull Kid and gets his horse stolen, along with his ocarina. After some epic parkour, we fall down a tree and die, according to MatPat, and turn into a small little Deku Scrub, which afterwards Skull Kid makes fun of us, leaves his companion behind, and lets us move on. There's nothing of note to go through in this introductory area, as there's no threat that could possibly hurt us, so we platform our way into Termina. We then meet a creepy old dude who wants us to get back a mask that Skull Kid stole from him.
He said it! He said it!
And if we get it back, then we can turn into a human again. After complying with the obviously shady character, we are thrown into Clock Town, where we can now do the intro proper. Again, there isn't really anything here that can hurt us except for a racist dog, but even the dog doesn't actually do any damage. For new players, the intro to Majora's Mask can be a bit confusing because you're not really given much direction. You're supposed to go around town, talk to the folks, and explore to find a way to progress. But because I know this game like the back of my hand, it doesn't take me too long to get through it. After picking up the Lost Fairy in the pond, we return it to the Great Fairy at the fountain, where we are given magic. Afterwards, we pop this balloon and talk to the boy on the ground, and after which we play a game of hide-and-go-seek with the racist kids of the town. And after which, we finally delve into the sewers. Making our way through the sewers, we make our way to the observatory. Here we look through the telescope and see that Skull Kid is just sitting on top of a tower in Clock Town and shakes his ass at us. Afterwards, the moon above cries from cringe and gives us a vital item we need to get past the intro, the Moon's Tear. After grabbing that, we dance with this Wizard of Oz looking guy and skip right to the night of the third day. We make our way to this leaf pod pad thingy and trade the tear for a land deed, which lets us get up to the clock tower. After carefully landing so as not to pick up this heart piece, I wait, and wait, and wait, until finally the stairs open up. We make our way up to confront Skull Kid, where we shoot some snot bubbles at him, get our ocarina, and then reset the cycle to start the game proper. But we do have one last thing to do before the game starts, and that's talk to the creepy mask salesman again. We get healed, get strangled, and learn the Song of Healing. And with that, I once again reset the cycle to have my first save and start the game proper. Now that we have a sword and shield, the town guard lets us outside and we venture on to Woodfall. On the way, we get a cutscene that is basically just, Skull Kid's not entirely bad, he was lonely. And then we venture into Woodfall. After dodging the slime things, apparently they're called choo-choos, I did not know these were actually the choo-choos of the game, we approach the Lake Tour boat ride where the person in charge of operating the boat is missing. Needing them to progress, we hop from lily pad to lily pad to the left side of the map. And can I just say how much I miss the N64 physics for this? In the 3DS version, your momentum basically just gets capped as soon as you leave the lily pad, so you can't zoom through the lake like you could in the N64 version. But getting back on track, we make it to the other side, and before I go talk to the potion shop owner, I thought it would be a great idea to get some Deku Nuts from the Deku Babas in the passage before it. And this was the first mistake I made on this run. I thought it would be a good idea to get the Deku Nuts for a section coming up and to get myself situated with the controls I set for the emulator. This ended up losing me a whole heart as I just plain messed up. Frustrated, I still carried on though. We talk to the potion shop owner who tells us her sister is missing, so we look for her in the forest next to the shop, where we meet a monkey that will take us to her. Now this forest section has these annoying as hell turtles, and why are they annoying you may ask? Because once you get close enough, they lock onto you and try to ram themselves into you. This makes it very hard to avoid any damage regularly, but because my first run got corrupted, I already knew the correct path through the forest. This makes the area much easier as you can just sprint straight to the correct path and hopefully avoid any damage. After finding the old woman, we have to go back, get medicine, and then go through the forest again to give it to her. And this is also the first and only bottle we will ever get in the entire game. So this entire part was pretty simple other than the damage I took at the beginning, and this is going pretty good. Fuck. Okay, so I accidentally just drank the potion, meaning I used a healing item, and you know what that means, my first reset. So that was really embarrassing, but I made my way through the area again, and this time actually managed to give her the potion. As thanks, she gives us a free ride on the boat, letting us get to the Deku Palace. Apparently there's a monkey being falsely executed in the palace because the king thought the monkey kidnapped the princess. This section has us easily sneak through the palace, get some brains, water, and then go to the roof to fly our way into the palace. The top section of this area is the most difficult part. You have to fly from platform to platform, but there are guards on some of them, meaning that you have to take them out before you move to the next platform. And this is where we engage in sniping wars. I have to hit them with my snot bubbles before I get hit, and unfortunately, I do get hit for a quarter of a heart. After gliding through the air with grace, we get to finally talk to the monkey, who explains the situation and gives us the song that will let us enter the dungeon. At this point, all we have left to reach the dungeon is a bit more gliding and to take out a few more enemies, which should be simple. First is this group of dragonflies. Now I could just risk it and fly right past them, but they could easily hit me out of the sky, so I try to aggro one at a time with my snot bubbles, and then after they are aggroed, I bury into the Deku Sprout and take them out. And see, this is working pretty well. I already took one out, and damn it. I kind of forgot there's a chance enemies can drop hearts here, so by accidentally healing, I have to reset again. Again, I go through the area until, yet again, I accidentally heal from the exact same enemy and have to reset again. Thankfully, lightning didn't strike 3 times as I avoided healing, learned the Song of Soaring, and got to the swamp where the temple is located. Here there are a few bugs that don't really pose much of a threat. I just take them out easily with my snot bubbles, take out any mad Dekus on the way, and make it to the main platform where I activate the owl statue and reset the cycle. And so I have successfully made it through the first real section of the run. So far, my biggest worry is the accidental drops of hearts because I have really nothing I can do about that, and so if I pick one up, I have to reset. That being said, the Woodfall area is the simplest of the run, and that makes me a bit nervous of how the rest of this run is going to play out. But regardless, it is the first checkpoint reached. After using the Song of Time to save, I used the Song of Soaring to get back to the Woodfall Temple entrance, where we play the Sonata of Awakening to spawn the dungeon. Using the Deku Sprout, we glide on over to the entrance and start the dungeon. Now the Woodfall Temple is the first dungeon in the game, and thus is the shortest and easiest dungeon in the entire game. Still, Woodfall Temple is a decently complex dungeon for being an introductory dungeon. From the entrance, we glide across from sprout to sprout and weave past the spiders and enter the central room. The goal is to get to the second floor, acquire the bow, activate the wooden flower in the middle of the room, and then solve a few more puzzles to get to the boss. Now, I'm sure by now you have seen these fairies roaming around the dungeon. These are the lost fairies, and they are somewhat of a threat for this run. Now, you are meant to collect these fairies and give them to a great fairy outside the dungeon for an upgrade, but because we are not allowed to do any optional content, I won't be collecting them. But the dangerous part of them is that if you happen to pick up a lost fairy, it will heal you, and this is problematic for obvious reasons. So now we have to consider that the fairies are also healing items, which means that I have to avoid them. This is easier said than done though, as some fairies drop from monsters that block your path, such as this Deku Baba in the central room. So as to keep this challenge from being even more tedious than it will already be, I won't reset if I pick up a fairy while I'm at full health, as I do not technically heal. If you want to consider this breaking the rules and a run ender, then that's fine, but personally I think it's okay. So if you see me pick up any fairies, just know that I am at full health, and if I am not at full health, I reset. Transitioning back into the run though, here in the main area, I kill some Deku Babas for some sticks I'll need later, and then move on over to the only unlocked door. Here we can skip to the center platform and use the Deku Sprout to grab a key from the chest. There is a door on the other side of the room with a mini boss behind it, and I did go through it on my first try, but all this room has is a map, so it's not something we need to do, and I skip it on every single attempt afterwards. But with the key in hand, we skip our way back to the locked door on the other side of the main room, where disaster strikes. The main puzzle of this room is that you have to pass fire from torch to torch using a stick, which doesn't sound too bad until you notice that the room is surrounded by poisoned water. This poisoned water deals a lot of damage in a very short amount of time if you fall into it, and it could easily kill you before you even get back onto solid ground. And this is where I made my first mistake. After moving the fire to the first torch, I tried to switch to my sword, which inevitably made me somersault right into the water, reducing my hearts to a measly 3/4 of a heart. While this is quite a setback, I decided to just keep on going and at least get a lay of the land before I have to inevitably reset. I loop back around and enter the room that just opened up, which gives you a compass, so something we don't need, and I will ignore the room on every attempt afterward. Once we return to the poison water room, I attempt to bring the fire to the next torch, where I miss the torch. What I wanted to do was quickly light the torch and then burn the spiderweb before the stick ran out, because moths follow you with the fire and then deal damage to you if you stand still. And so looking at my health in the moment, you could probably hazard a guess as to why I wanted to keep on moving. This strategy ultimately failed though, as the stick burned up before I made it to the web. After cooling down, I realized that I'll have to stop after I light the second torch. So this time I take it slowly, and after lighting the torch, I fall to my doom. That's officially the first death of the run, and a pretty embarrassing one at that. After resetting, I once again go through the dungeon until I reach the same room, where this time I successfully get to the next room, only taking a quarter of the heart from the stupid ass moths. Here I grab some sticks before climbing the stairs, and the next room is a pitch black room with some black bows attacking us. These aren't too much of a threat, as they will only target you when you get close to them, so as long as you're paying attention and know where they are, they don't pose much of a threat. Now to open the door, you have to light all 3 torches in the room, and this is where I got a bit cocky and started to light them before I took out all of the black bows. This ends up getting me hit, but even that didn't take any visible health. Afterwards, I had the genius idea to kill all of the black bows in the room and spawn a chest. And remember how I said that the lost fairies heal you? Well, I guess my muscle memory from playing this game to 100% completion has come to bite me in the ass, because this chest has a lost fairy. So after I open the chest, the fairy heals me. And this is when I first learned that they heal you. I initially didn't notice, but when I moved to the next room, I noticed what happened, and begrudgingly, I reset. I make my way through the dungeon again and eventually make it to one of the mini-bosses, the Dinolfos. This fight is pretty basic. The Dinolfos would usually just swipe at you, so the best strategy is to just block his swipe and then swipe right back at him afterwards. Then keep your distance as to not get hit by his fire attack. After doing this a few times, we defeat it and acquired the bow, one of the most useful items in the entire game. Afterwards, we move to the other side of the room to fight yet another mini-boss to get the boss key. This is the Gecko, and it is a frog that is called Gecko. And the Gecko is even more of a pushover than the last fight. After slashing them a few times, they'll get on top of a turtle and start attacking you. Now all you have to do is just get into a Deku Sprout and then flip the turtle, letting you shoot the frog. We repeat this process until the boss is defeated, and then we acquire the boss key. Now all that's left is a few more puzzles and the boss. This is probably the biggest reason I was considering playing on 3DS version, because the aiming in N64 version is so painful. The next room is pretty simple as well, because all I have to do is take out the 2 fireflies roaming the room and then glide my way over to the boss room worry-free. The boss of Woodfall Temple is Odalwa, and is probably one of the most difficult first bosses in the entire Zelda franchise, but also one of the most unrestricted. While in most boss fights there's one clear way to beat the boss with obvious weak spots and clear methods to deal damage, Odalwa just throws you into the room and says figure it out. While he doesn't have any weak spots, you can deal damage in a number of ways. The best way is to stun him with arrows and then get close to slash him. This is easier said than done though, as his sword is Berserk Dragon Slayer length, so trying to get close without being stunned is impossible, as he has incredible range. On the other hand, you can't just shoot an arrow at him and stun him, because he has a big ass shield that will block any arrows you shoot if you're facing him. For my first try at this fight, I really was just trying to get a feel for the boss and plan out a strategy. In fact, I was getting absolutely thrown around in my first attempt at the boss, and to make matters worse, After a certain amount of time, Odalwa will start summoning bugs and moths, and these are the worst part of the fight. Now, looking at the wiki after the fact, apparently you can use the bombs in the room to distract and kill these bugs, but in my attempt to do this boss from memory alone, I inadvertently made the fight harder for myself. Because I didn't know I could use the bombs to distract the bugs, I end up just running away from them and wait for Odalwa to cast his fire ring so that it kills the bugs. Now while I'm running away from these bugs, I keep an ear out for Odalwa, and if I hear him start chanting, I try to get a slash or two in before I get damaged. But even then, the fight does not seem to go that well. He keeps on summoning bugs, leading me to just keep on running and eventually take more and more damage, and it doesn't take too long until I eventually die while trying to slash him. After resetting, I make my way through the temple again and get back to the boss room. I'm not feeling too confident this time around either because I lost quite a bit of health in the dungeon, leaving me with only 1 3/4 of a heart. That being said though, I am starting to develop a strategy. Anytime he swipes or chants, I attempt to stun him with an arrow, where I get then a good 2 slashes in before he teleports. I managed to get him once before he summoned more bugs, but then I got greedy and got him another time when he was summoning moths, leading me to take more damage and putting me down to 3/4 of a heart. Then, disaster strikes. Odalwa casts the Ring of Fire like I wanted, but because he teleported right in front of me before and knocked me over, 2 of the bugs were close enough to make it into the inner ring without getting burned. So here I try to just block any incoming damage, but because I'm getting pushed into the fire, I try to roll away and kill the bugs. But right as I am killing the bugs, Odalwa thinks it is the best time to slash at me, making me lose even more health, putting me at 1/4 of a heart. And of course, as soon as the whole ordeal is over with, he summons more bugs, and at this point, I have mentally given up on the attempt. I swipe at the bugs coming my way and end up dying. Yet again, I reset and go through the temple. Once I make it to the boss room with health half of what it was, I once again enter. First thing I did was slice the shrub right next to me to top up on my arrows, but unfortunately, Odalwa just happened to feel like doing a room-wide lunge and hits me. That being said, this attempt was actually going pretty well after that. He was going for constant chants and swipes I could avoid and take advantage of, and by the time he summoned his bugs, I already got quite a few hits in. After the bugs come into play though, it's a long time until he finally uses the Ring of Fire, and after that I go on the offensive again, getting more and more hits in. Eventually he summons his moths again, and I get greedy. I circle around and try to get a hit in before I get hit, but unfortunately the moths reach me before I do, and I die. Now for this session, I was going to do one more attempt before I stopped for the day, so it was now or never for that day. After yet again going through the temple, I make it to the boss, this time almost at full health. Once again, the first phase of the fight went pretty well. I didn't get as lucky as the last attempt, but I did still get a few slashes on in the Achilles heel. I attempted to kill some of the bugs with my bow before they got too close, but this ended up getting me in a pinch as the bow entered first person mode. But after a sick backflip, I avoided any damage. In this fight, I got absurdly lucky with how many times the boss casted the Ring of Fire, and even with getting hit by the fire a few times, I get a good amount of hits in, and the luck just seemed to keep on going. For some reason, he just forgot he could summon bugs for an amount of time because I got a good few minutes where he would just do slashes at me, giving me opportunities to stun and hit him. The bugs do eventually get summoned back, but it doesn't take too long for them to be gone again, because once again, Odalwa used the Ring of Fire. On top of that, Odalwa is also in the inner circle with me, giving a free 2 slashes on him. After that, he goes for his Beyblade move a few more times until yet again casting the Ring of Fire, where I can still hit him from the inside. I do get some more hits in, but I accidentally touch the firewall, leading to some more damage. Once again, the bugs are back, but not for long as he immediately uses the Ring of Fire, getting rid of most of them, but hitting me to the edge, once again taking away more health. Now I'm only at half a heart, so now it is do or die. After running away from the bugs once again, they eventually burn and I get another opportunity to stun and hit him. So after stunning him, I carefully run up, avoiding the heart on the left side, and slash at him. and he finally goes down. Honestly, I have never felt so much satisfaction from defeating a boss in a Zelda game, and honestly, this just made me appreciate the boss so much more, even if I did accidentally add another challenge on the fight. Still, after killing Odalwa, I gained a lot more confidence in this run, as he will probably one of the more difficult bosses in the game. But with Woodfall Temple finished, I carefully make sure I don't pick up the heart container or any of the hearts surrounding it, and pick up Odalwa's remains. After which, Link takes some acid and hallucinates a giant giving him the Oath to Order. After which we ignore the princess and immediately warp to Clock Town, where we deposit our 9 rupees and use the Song of Time to save. And with that, that's the first area done, and while I know it's about to get more difficult, I'm actually feeling pretty good about this run. Now next up is Snowhead, but before we head over there, I go outside to recover my magic and arrows. Then we grab a silver rupee on the roof of the shooting range so we can buy the bomb bag, which is required to progress. Now I actually forgot whether or not the bomb bag is necessary, so before I bought it, I went to Snowhead Entrance just to check, but after confirming we do need the bomb bag, I head back and actually buy it. Now we could have gotten the blast mask to get through it, but I consider that to be more of a side quest, so I think it's fair to consider the bomb bag as a required item rather than an optional item. But making our way through the path to Snowhead, we come across some Tektites, which are mildly annoying. The worst part is that they drop hearts, and because they do, I accidentally pick one up while fighting, and I have to reset. So after doing all the prep work again, I work my way through the path and eventually make it to the mountain village. Now Snowhead probably has the safest lead-ups to a dungeon in the entire game, as there isn't a single enemy you're forced to fight. So I'm hoping that this section will go without many problems. So first I make my way to the Goron village, where we can find Kapora Gapora, who will lead us through some invisible platforms and into a cave that has the Lens of Truth. Making our way back to the village, we use the Lens of Truth to see the dead Goron Daruni, who leads us back to the mountain village, up a mountain and into yet another cave that has his grave. He tells us that he's dead, no shit, and he regrets leaving the people of his village. We heal him with the power of music and obtain his soul, mask. After we desecrate his grave for some water, I then try to be quick and careful at the same time, as the spring water will cool if we take too long. But in my attempt to be quick enough without taking any damage, I fall and take quite a bit of damage. On top of that, before I could reach the old man, the water cools, meaning that I took damage for no reason. But before I go back, I go into the Goron village again and talk to the crying kid so that we can get the old man we unfreeze later to teach us a song. After, we run all the way back to the grave, grab water, and this time I just jump off the cliff, because if I land in the water, I take no damage. As I take my leap of faith, I realized I fucked up and break my ankles, putting me at half a heart. But we do finally thaw the old man, who teaches us the Goron lullaby. Or at least he would, but because of his dementia, we only learn half of the song. We now go back to the crying Goron, play the intro, and then we finally get the whole song. Now at this point, we are almost done with the area, and all we have to do is some platforming, so we'll be golden. So in trying to be careful not to die, I attempted to stop after the first ramp, only to realize I trapped myself in a spot where I couldn't get enough speed to break the snow boulders coming my way, and I eventually died. After resetting, I do all the prep, make my way through the same events, this time actually land in the water, and make it to the owl statue in front of the temple, and finally play the Song of Time to save. Now we're at the second temple of the game, but before we can even enter, we have to play the Goron's lullaby so that we can roll our way up to the temple. This section at the entrance of the dungeon is actually a bit difficult for me at times, as I am using a PlayStation controller, and so I don't have any notches on the controller. This makes it a lot harder to control the rolling as Goron Link. Getting a good handle on the controls takes a while, but eventually I make my way into the dungeon. Now in this first room, there are some small enemies that will chase us, but thanks to our Goron form, a lot of the enemies in the game are actually pretty easy and safe to deal with. Instead of using Link's sword, we can just ground pound in Goron form, which on top of being an AoE attack is also just way safer than punching or using a sword as we launch into the air. So after quickly taking care of these snow mites, we can proceed to this area with a wolf. Now on every other attempt I just run past the wolf, but because this is my first attempt, I am basically just playing through the dungeon normally to get a lay of the land. So after killing the wolf, I walk into the only open door and cross the bridge, where the box gives me hearts, and so unfortunately I have to reset already. Now back in the same room on the next attempt, I avoid the box this time, and before I move on, I break some of the pots for arrows. Because I don't want to risk accidentally picking up any hearts, the only way to safely get things like magic and arrows will be by picking up and throwing the pots to check what's in them first before picking them up. After refilling on arrows and magic, I go upstairs to grab a dungeon map, meaning that I don't really have a reason to come to this room and I can skip it every other attempt after this. Now, after this, I fell down to the bottom of the dungeon and I wanted to get some bombs for later, but then I end up swiping at a bush and healing, so yet again, that's another reset. Making it back yet again to where I was, I proceed to the room directly across from the one that spits us out into the first floor of the room. The main gimmick of the Snowhead Temple is that there's a central pillar that can be raised or lowered, and you can take chunks out of it to make platforms to progress. But because all we're trying to do is get the dungeon item and the boss key, we will only have to raise a pillar one time. But back into the room we entered, after pulling this block, we get a small key which can be used on the door in the room where we entered the temple. We backtrack to open the door, which leads us to a relatively open room with 2 wolves and a bombable wall, which is why I wanted to pick up some bombs. After dealing with the wolves, I blow up the wall, walk up the stairs, and make my way through the next room, which doesn't take long as it's just a platforming room with a key, which we use on the locked door right beside us. After clearing the puzzle in the next room, we are now on the second floor, in which we launch ourselves to the other side of the room and check the right side door until we eventually launch our way into the other side of the room, which leads to the first mini-boss, Wizrobe. While Wizrobe is a mini-boss, he doesn't really put up much of a challenge. I get caught off guard at first, but after that it's really easy, as if you have headphones, you can hear where he's coming from. So after that, we get the fire arrows, which opens up a ton for us. But of course, I seem to have not learned my lesson. As I slash the snowballs beside me to refill some arrows of magic, I end up picking up a heart, and that's another reset. Again, once I'm back to where I was, I now head back down to the first floor with all the frozen doors and melt them. This opens up a room with a ton of ice enemies that I can melt with my fire arrows, and then light up the lamps to open up the room to raise the central pillar. After which, I make my way to one of the first rooms with the ice enemies and ramp. After killing all the enemies in the room, you spawn a chest that has a small key. This key opens up a door all the way at the top of the dungeon, so after making that trek, we open this room with 2 Enos? I don't know how to fucking say it. Here's the wiki page. While it can be pretty overwhelming with the 2 of them throwing snowballs at you constantly, once you get behind a pillar, you can prepare a fire arrow and kill them with 1 shot, so it's really not that hard. Next is a room with 2 Lizalfos, and while you can just run right past them, for some reason I fought them here. Past that door is an entrance to the next Wizrobe fight, which is just as easy as the last and gives us the boss key. Now all that's left is to break 2 sections of the central pillar and make our way to the boss room. But while I do this, the worst thing happens. After clearing 1 section of the pillar away, I attempted to roll up the stairs, where I bumped into the wall, left ball form, and plummeted to my death. You know, at this point, I'm starting to not get surprised at how embarrassingly I die and have to reset in this run, but it does get quite annoying having to restart the entire dungeon every single time I reset, but I guess that's a part of the challenge. After yet another reset due to a dumb mistake, this time I actually make it to the boss, where we take on Got? I'm just gonna call him Got. Anyways, the gimmick of this fight is that it is basically a race where Got will constantly run around the arena and you have to chase him in Goron form. But Just like with Odalwa, you can deal damage in more than just one way. My initial strategy was to wait at a point in the track and shoot arrows at him every time he looped around, but then my plan was shattered instantly. It seems if you don't chase Got, he will turn around and start charging at you, and this is what leads me to taking some damage and getting down to half a heart. So with my plan in shambles, I end up transforming and attempting the boss like normal, but after a few hits, I run into one of the electricity balls and die. So yeah, the strategy I thought would be effective turned out to be a bust, but while I didn't do much damage in the fight, I did learn something useful. Because Got will turn around and try to ram you if you don't chase him, what if I purposefully exploited that? So now my game plan is this: stay in Goron form and purposely trigger him to start running at me, in which I anticipate and get into my spiky form and do some damage. This way I can limit what Got does and make sure I do damage little by little, without being in much danger. With this plan in mind, I reset once again and make my way through the temple again. After an interesting glitch, I get back to the boss room, this time with full health. Now at first I thought it would be worth a try to do the fight normally for a little bit, as I have a safety net with a bit of health. And while I do get some damage in, after getting hit by a rock, I decide to switch to the safer strategy. Now a big reason this strat works is because you can hear when Got is getting close and from what direction, which gives me enough time to charge up and hit him head on. Now sometimes I do get unlucky and can't hit him because I don't have enough time to charge up, but even after that I just loop around and hit him on the second lap. Now another attack Got can do is shoot electricity at you if you're far away enough from him, and you can actually hear it right here. So now I think when he does this, even if you're not close enough to get hit, it's time to reset and let him come to you. And I learned this the hard way as I looped back around and he was already shooting electricity at me. And while I try to take cover by the entrance, the electricity pulls some hocus pocus bullshit and hits me through a wall. After this, I stop, and this time I got enough time to charge. Getting 2 hits in, I hear the electricity and wait again for him to rush me. But this time I lose my momentum from the hill and get thrown around. Now here is where I made a fatal mistake. After getting hit, I started to get a bit desperate and chased after him, in which I got punished by his electricity. Afterwards, I went back to the original strat, which netted me a few hits, and after taking a quarter heart of damage and missing my chance a few times, I was starting to get impatient, in which I made a risk of trying to get close by weaving through his electricity. I did this as I judged that his health was starting to get really low as the room was starting to fall apart, which is a sign that Got is weak. So after catching up and toppling him, I get a good few swings in before he gets up, and I eventually continue to chase him. Getting even more hits on him, I eventually get hit, which makes me revert back to my strat. After a very close call, I started to get back into the rhythm of things, but then Got used his electric move, and I didn't hear it. As I turn the corner, I get bombarded by electricity, in which I weave through the first one and get hit by the second one, killing me. Yeah, that was pretty rough, and even though that was the last attempt I had time for that day, I ended the session with confidence that I could beat him in the next attempt. Now that I have a firm grasp of the boss patterns and behavior, as well as how to manipulate them, I feel a lot more confident. So long as I keep my cool and stick with the script for the next attempt, I should be able to beat him. That being said, the next attempt was not a good start for the session. I began the fight with only 2 hearts and got some pretty bad luck. Sometimes I wouldn't charge fast enough, and I even walked right into some electricity, which led to my untimely demise. At this point, I am starting to doubt the strat I thought would work, but I decided to give it at least one more try before revamping it. Once I make my way through the dungeon for what feels the 100th time, I make it to the boss room, this time with full health. This gave me a bit of a confidence boost in this attempt, as now I have a bit more of a safety net. The beginning of the fight went extremely smooth. I would stand at the entrance, hear him running, and then hit him. The best part was that I could always get 2 hits in before he used his electric attack, and I always was able to wait at the entrance again. This is ideal because the entrance of the room is the longest stretch of flat ground, meaning that my charge won't be interrupted when I start rolling. And honestly, there is not much to talk about on this attempt. Everything goes very smoothly. Every time I hear the sound cue, I set up to charge at him, and I get a steady rhythm going, as well as a lot of damage at a constant pace. The worst part is that when Got gets low on his health, he will change direction somewhat sporadically at times, but it's manageable with the current strategy, and before long, the mechanical goat is finally slain. While that was definitely an easier fight than Odawa, it was also a lot more tedious to do. But at the same time, approaching the boss differently like this has made me really appreciate the boss design. While in other Zelda games there's usually one weak spot you have to hit, in Majora's Mask you can take multiple approaches to the bosses. And while I do usually just fight the bosses like normal, doing this challenge so far has given me a lot more appreciation for what is already my favorite game of all time. But enough of that, before we can use our post-dungeon save, we have a few things to do first. Because the entrance to the Great Bay is blocked by a fence, we need Epona to enter it. And to get Epona, we need to get to Romani Ranch, which is blocked by a large boulder. So to be able to blow that boulder up, we need to get a powder keg. As to how we get a powder keg? Well, now that we have killed Goat, the Goron village thaws and returns to normal, which allows us to talk to this Goron right here, who will give us a powder keg certification, but only if we pass his test. So after passing the test, we get a free powder keg, which we use to get into Romani Ranch. After doing some target practice, we get Epona song and then ride away, leaving the ranch to be invaded by aliens. This part I was slightly worried about, as if I didn't clear the dungeon in time and get to the ranch, Romani's ranch would already be invaded by aliens and I wouldn't be able to get the song. But now with everything we need, we can head over to the Great Bay. With Epona, we jump the fence to the Great Bay and head on over to the shore, where we see a dying Zora. After pushing him up to the shore, we heal him, where he tasks us with finding some stolen Zora eggs. And now we start the most tedious section of the entire game, and one that almost made me lose my sanity. See, in this part of the game, you have to retrieve 7 Zora eggs, 4 of which are in the Gerudo Fortress, and 3 of which are in the Pinnacle Rock. The kicker is that you have to put the eggs in bottles, which wouldn't be too bad if this was a regular playthrough, as there are 4 bottles you can get at this point, but because I only have 1 bottle, that means I will have to transport the eggs one at a time. So every time I get an egg, I have to fly back to the marine lab, put it in the tank, and then swim back to the fortress. The same goes for the eggs at Pinnacle Rock, but the trip back from there is even worse because you can't play the Song of Soaring underwater. All of this put together leads to a very long and tedious process to be able to retrieve all of the eggs and get the required song to enter the dungeon. So next time you play Majora's Mask and get annoyed you have to do 2 trips to the fortress, hey, at least it wasn't 4. After getting into the fortress and taking a considerable amount of damage, I grab the hookshot and the first egg. And after making my way back, I use the hookshot to get up to the left side and enter the first room. After sneaking past the guard, I enter the next room, and here is where we come across our first roadblock of the area. So before each egg, you have to fight one of the pirates, and these fights are infuriating. The good thing about these fights is that they won't actually kill you, just throw you out of the fortress when you get low enough on health. But therein lies the problem. I got to this fight at 1 heart, meaning it only takes 1 hit before I get kicked out. On top of that, these pirates are no pushovers. While they don't have a huge moveset, they will block almost every attack you make. So if you want to do damage, you have to attack while they are starting up their attack. But because of my low health, one mistake while doing this means I have to walk all the way back to the room and try again. And this happens for almost a full hour. I would try, and every time I would just get hit once and kicked out. After getting my face curb stomped for the 100th time, I finally came up with a strategy. After blocking a swing, I will try to push up and swing back. It's okay if it's blocked, but sometimes this leads to the swing getting through and dealing some damage. The main reason I do this is to push the pirate into a corner where I can jump slash, which seems to have a really good chance of hitting. By doing this over and over again, I can keep relatively safe and still do a steady stream of damage. And after a long time of getting my ass handed to me, I finally beat the pirate and grab the egg, which makes that 1 down, 2 to go. After dropping the egg off at the lab, I head back and go to the other end of the left side of the fortress, where there's one more egg to collect. This time, the pirate didn't take nearly as many attempts, and after a few tries, I beat her and move on to the next room, where I panicked. See, in my attempt to kill this enemy guarding the egg, I tripped and fell into the tank, taking damage and taking me down to a quarter heart. After which, I just end up transforming into the Zora form where I grab the egg, and then press the wrong button to surface, making me punch the wall and get hit by a clam, killing me. So yeah, after all that time, I have to restart, and that was just soul-crushing. I generally wanted to just give up for the day after that, but I had enough time for one more try, so I decided to reset and give it a go. This time, I get through the fortress without any roadblocks, thanks to having full health and the strat I developed. The pirate fights with full health are pretty easy, and after a few trips, I got every egg in the fortress. And before I head back to the lab, I grab a picture of one of the pirates for later. Now, next up is the Pinnacle Rock eggs. To get to Pinnacle Rock, you have to get the seahorse to guide you through the sea. But to free the seahorse, you have to give this sailor a picture of a pirate, which is kind of very weird and makes me surprised this game got an E rating. Well, that and all the death and depression. After getting to Pinnacle Peak, we accidentally get swallowed by an eel before rocking his shit and stealing one of the eggs. Then we rinse and repeat until finally, after a long and tedious fetch quest, we got the new wave Bossa Nova, after which I immediately used the Song of Time and reset, as now we can get to the dungeon. Next up, the Great Bay Temple. After making our way to the Zora Cape, we play the new wave Bossa Nova and head on over to the Great Bay Temple. Now, the main gimmick of the dungeon is that there's a water current in the central room that can be changed, and this current will dictate where you can and cannot go. Now, on people's first time playing this dungeon, it can seem pretty confusing and leads to a lot of people losing their way. But the dungeon is actually designed to be pretty streamlined if you're paying attention. See, what you need to do is open different red valves, which light up and show you where to go for the next valve. And after all the valves are open, you can go back to the starting room to change the current, where you now do the same thing for the green valves, and that opens a way to the boss. When I put it like that, it seems like a relatively easy dungeon, and that's where you would be horribly wrong, because this dungeon took the life out of me. So at this point, most dungeons took a few attempts, about 2 to 4 hours of gameplay, but this dungeon alone took me 11 hours to beat, and that was over 3 days. So for 3 days, all I would be doing in my free time was trying the same dungeon over and over and over again until I could finally do it. But what made this so difficult? Well, there is a single culprit in that. Wart. After collecting a small key in this room, it opens up the door to the first mini-boss in the dungeon. And this boss is Wart. A boss I can only think was specifically made to piss me off at every opportunity. But what makes Wart such a pain in the ass? Well, it's mostly these jelly balls. See, to be able to damage Wart, you have to take a bunch of these balls off of him and kill them. Doing this is extremely tedious though, as if you go one at a time, it takes way too long. So the best option I found was bombs and fire arrows. These take a lot of jelly off at a time, but therein lies the next problem. The fact that these things can just surround you in an instant. Once a few of these get close to you, it's really hard to get rid of them without taking a bit of damage. So I basically have to run away and use some bombs and fire arrows so I can get rid of them at a safe distance. Of course, this uses a ton of magic, so I can't get rid of all of them this way. Add on top of that once Wart has received enough damage, all the jelly will fall off and he will start just running around the room, slamming into walls. So not only do you have to avoid getting hit by these stupid ass bouncy balls, but you also have the boss itself running into you. Now I think you can easily guess this, but my first fight with him ended terribly. After I got him into a second phase, I thought that I could use Goron form to continuously spam slam so I could deal damage and still be safe. But that didn't end well. And the next attempt doesn't go so well either. I get stuck in a corner and again end up dying. But surprisingly, I was able to defeat him on my third attempt at the cost of almost all my health. After killing Wart, we get the ice arrows, an essential item for the dungeon, and with them in hand, we can open up the first red valve in the room right outside the mini-boss. After freezing an Octorok and catching a stray from his buddy, we open the first valve and make our way to the next mini-boss. The great thing about the Great Bay Temple is that the two mini-bosses are right at the start and right after each other, making it so I can at least get the hardest part out of the way first. Now the next boss is another gecko, this time with some slime. The idea is to freeze the slime, forcing it to crash into the ground, and then chase the frog while avoiding getting hit by the jumping slime. Compared to Wart, this boss is much easier, but you still do need to pay attention or else you're going to be getting hit a lot from the slime, which is what happened immediately after I walked into the boss room. On the second time around, I took less damage from Wart in the fight before, and now I easily kill the frog, which lets us pick up the boss key. Now all that's left is to go around opening the red valves, change the current, and then do the same for the green valves. And when I was in one of the last rooms with the last valve before the one in front of the boss room, I get hit by a choo-choo and die. After this, I got stuck in a rut for a while. Over and over again I would die on Wart, and if I didn't die from Wart, the frog right after would finish me off. It felt like I was in a Groundhog Day situation, as every single time it was the same thing over and over again. Do prep, go to the dungeon, fight Wart, and die. And this went on for hours. Eventually, the next day, I attempted to adjust my strategy for Wart, as it was not consistent at all and was also very time consuming. And this is where I started using the Goron strat again, like in the beginning, but it just did a little. Now this new strat was something I found online, so shout out to Probably Butter for this strat. But basically, first you time bombs to hit Wart when his eyes open, which will hurt him even when the jelly balls are still attached. Then you kill all of the jelly that falls off with Deku Nuts and fire arrows. After doing this a few times, Wart will start his second phase, and this is where the Goron form comes in. Immediately after phase 2 begins, switch to Goron, move to a corner, and spam slam. This will kill most of, if not all of the balls, and if you're lucky, you might kill Wart too. And even if you don't kill Wart, with the reduced jelly around the arena, it makes it 10 times easier to kill him and not take damage. This new strat works way better than what I was doing before. Even though I still may take some damage, it's nearly not as much as I did before, and now I am consistently beating Wart. So with this, I can now finally beat Wart consistently and with some health. But that doesn't mean the rest of this dungeon is a cakewalk. Even with the Wart strat, it takes me 3 more attempts until I finally make it to the boss room for the first time. Now thankfully, Gjorg is actually a relatively easy boss compared to the last 2 dungeon bosses. Gjorg really only does 2 things. Hit the platform to try to get you to fall off, and jump out of the water and try to hit you on the platform. So the method to beat him is really basic. Once he slams into the platform, shoot him with an arrow, and then swim up with Zora Link and use the aura to do damage. Then jump back onto the platform and repeat. Now this is easier said than done though, as after I get my first hit in, I bounce off the wall trying to get back onto the platform, after which Gjorg chomps down on me and kills me. But this time, I had hope. Now that I have gotten to the boss, I feel like I could kill Gjorg pretty easily if I just lock in. That being said, it took me a ton of attempts to get back to the boss room, as I accidentally healed on a few attempts, and others I just straight up died. One that especially sucked was this one on the frog boss, where I got surrounded and jumped by the slime, but I do eventually make it back to the boss room. This time I get Gjorg low enough to start his second phase, which is the exact same as the first, but he unleashes some minions on you, and these minions are not a threat in the slightest, and they don't even respawn. No, the most deadly part of the second phase is actually the cutscene. You see, when Gjorg spawns his minions in this cutscene, it also resets your direction and momentum, meaning that you have to quickly readjust to be able to get back onto the platform. And this is where I failed. After failing to get back onto the platform, I panic, and I try again, and again until I just try to pull myself up the normal way, where Gjorg catches up and kills me. Surprisingly though, I was feeling more motivated than ever. Now that I am finally getting to the boss, I feel like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. After yet again going through the dungeon and killing Wart for the 20th time, I make it back to the boss room. The first phase, yet again, has nothing much to talk about. He goes for the platform slam, I stun and then hit him, and we repeat this 2 more times. Now this is the deciding moment, the moment that would determine if I can finally leave this godforsaken dungeon behind me. Gjorg spawns his minions, and I made it. At this point, I knew it was do or die. With the hardest part of the fight done, I locked in and focused on getting those last 2 hits in. The first attack was a bit of a close call as I almost ran into these hearts here, but finally, I ram into him and the death cutscene triggers. And I have never felt so relieved. A dungeon that took my sanity, that has some of the most annoying restarts and bosses, I have finally beaten it. And even though I consider the Great Bay to be an amazing dungeon normally, after this I don't think I'll ever look at it the same again. Also, I am now the president of the all-new Wart Hater fan club because holy shit, I never want to see that ugly, wrinkly eyeball ever again. So after 11 hours of trial and error, I finally grabbed Georg's remains, where afterwards we trip again, this time hearing the voices in our head tell us to save their friend. And now I get to play that sweet, sweet Song of Time and finally save, leaving only 1 dungeon left. Now the next and final area is the special case I mentioned for this run. This is because there's essentially an extra dungeon in the form of Icona Castle. That, along with how much side things we have to get done, now leads me to splitting this into 2 different saves. The optional things I need to grab all the way to the end of the well will be one, and then the castle and the climb up to the Stone Tower Temple is another. Now, I know this is bending the rules a little bit, but with how much that has to get done and how many fights I have to do, I felt like this is a sensible thing to do. Now the first thing we have to do is visit Icona Graveyard so we can get the Captain's Mask. This mask is necessary to open a certain grave that will give us a song required in the next section. Now after we play the Sonata of Awakening, the Skull Captain will start running and starts the fight. Now this fight is actually pretty unique as you have to chase the Captain while you work through blocks of minions separated by firewalls. This means you have to kill the minions before being able to move forward, and if you take too long, the Captain will get away. Now, the best way to catch up is to shoot the Captain with an arrow right off the bat, and after you kill the minions in the first section, this usually lets you catch up in time. And once you deal damage to the Captain, all the minions will die and he'll start the fight for real. Now this fight is relatively simple. All I have to do is keep my distance, stun him with an arrow, and jump slash to deal the most damage possible. Then just rinse and repeat. After a while, he'll start trying to jump on you after each hit, but as long as you're still moving, it doesn't pose much of a threat. The worst part is definitely just the sheer range the Captain has. Even with this pretty safe method, I end up losing most of my hearts, but after doing enough damage, the Captain calls off the fight and gives us the Captain's Mask, which we use to get into the first grave of the Iconic Graveyard. Here we have a pretty annoying room, a room of bats. You have to light all the torches in this room to open the door, but because of how many bats are in this room, you basically have to get rid of them all, or else you won't be able to do anything. Here I tried fire arrows before getting swarmed and killed. On the next go around, I have more hearts when I get to the room and eventually kill them all. In the next room, you have to fight an Iron Knuckle, which has pretty predictable patterns, and I make sure I jump slash every time it does a long swing. Now in the second phase, it gets faster and has more range, but unfortunately I ran straight into a swing and died. After various more resets from a range of reasons, I eventually learned that using the Deku Mask was the best way to clear out the room of bats. After learning this, I get through the room no problem with no damage. And this continues with the Iron Knuckle fight, which I breeze through. After this fight, we learn the Song of Storms, an essential song for progressing. After getting the song, we fly over to the Milk Road Owl statue, where we race the Gorman brothers for the Garo Mask, which we will need to get into the Iconic Canyon. After all of that, we can now go into Iconic Canyon. After getting into the canyon, we head to the back of the area where we use the Song of Storms to calm the spirit and make the well run again. Now we can trick this kid into leaving her house so we can sneak in and heal her father, which gives us the Gibdo Mask. And now finally we prepare for the massive well trade quest, and here is the most disappointing part of the run. And it has nothing to do with the game itself, but more of the recording. For some reason, Streamlabs just decided to be a piece of shit and freeze the recording right here. And this sucks. You can see I was getting all the items for the trade here, but for some reason, right here, the recording freezes. And I don't know why. The audio is still there, but for some reason, the screen is just this menu for the rest of the session. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I only noticed after finishing the recording session, so I already saved after the well, meaning I couldn't reset, and I really did not want to start fresh and restart the entire run. So even though it sucks, I decided to just keep on going and ask you to trust that I actually did finish the well. Now that being said, the well quest is pretty easy. There isn't really much to fight other than a big Poe that's a pushover and a few bats. And the worst part was that I had to leave to get milk because I only had one bottle. So other than that, the well is a cakewalk. Still, I feel terrible that the recording froze, but at this point, I can't really do anything other than just starting the challenge from the beginning again, and I'm just not going to do that. So sorry about that, and if that validates the run, then that's understandable, but regardless, I'm gonna continue. After the well, we get the mirror shield, and this lets us get into the castle. But before that, I save. Now I make my way over to the Icona Castle, which is essentially a mini dungeon. The point of the dungeon is to eventually make it to the roof so you can break a wall in the ceiling. Let us use the light with the mirror shield we got to open the wall blocking the boss room. So first we move over to the left-hand room where we have to navigate through this falling checkerboard floor. After we cross this room and make our way to this switch, we open the ceiling above the right side of the castle. Now in the right-hand room, we take care of a wall master and then open this wall. Past the door right in front of us is yet another Wizrobe mini-boss, which, like the Wizrobes in Snowhead Temple, goes down with ease. Moving upstairs, we blow open the roof, letting us fight the boss. Now the boss of Icona Castle is actually 3 bosses. The first are 2 lackeys, and then Egos du Icona, which I'll just call the king from here on out. Now this is the one fight other than Majora that I was absolutely dreading for this challenge. Not only do you have to fight 3 enemies, they also hit like a truck. Now first up is the lackeys, which will fight you at the same time, and that alone makes this one of the worst fights here. Because they attack you at the same time, it is almost impossible to find an opening, and because of that, I just keep getting hit, and before long, I fall. Now after this, it was getting pretty late and I was getting really tired, so I went to bed, and the next day, I saw this video by Zor Zelda that gave me an idea. Now a huge shout out to this channel because it showed me that it is actually possible to stun the bosses with Deku Nuts, letting you get free hits in. With this information, I jumped right into another attempt. This time I can actually stand a chance against the minions, and after I topple one of them, I open one of the curtains. Now unlike the other bosses in the game, these guys will only ever actually die once you shine light from the outside on them. So something that I need to do as fast as possible is burn one of the curtains. Now because I took the time to burn the curtain when one of the minions was down, I gave it enough time to get back up. But with the curtain down, the rest of the fight with the 2 lackeys goes smoothly and it doesn't take long until I kill both of them. Now next up is the king, who is the real roadblock. Now the king can also be stunned by Deku Nuts, but it is much harder to do so as there are not nearly as many vulnerability frames to do so. This means that to be able to stun him, you really have to time it out well. Now on top of this, he hits like a truck, has poison breath, and worst of all, he can decapitate himself. When he does this, his body becomes impervious to attacks, and the head that floats around will try to attach itself to you and stun you, giving the body a free attack. The worst part of this is that it is really hard to avoid the head. If you try to run away, it'll catch up to you and you can't deal any damage to it either. So after running around like a headless chicken, I eventually get stunned and die. Now after resetting, I took a second to look at the Zelda Dungeon wiki to see if maybe there's a way to avoid the decapitation stun. And to my surprise, there actually is one. Now one method is to run around the arena with the bunny cap, but because we can't get that, I have to use the other strat, which is to roll around the arena as Goron Link. Now with this, I attempt the castle again, and this time I make sure I open the curtain right off the bat to save on time. After a bit, the minions go down and I once again face the king. And while I do stun him a few times, I also get hit a few times. After a little bit of time, he goes for the decapitation move, which I successfully avoid this time thanks to the Goron strat. Unfortunately, a bit later, I get hit while I try to stun him, and die. Now the final and largest part of the fight I need to figure out is how to deal consistent and safe damage. Now I know the Deku Nuts can stun him, but so far I have been trying to use them when I think he's going to attack, leading me to sometimes being late and getting hit. So what I try is that I only try to stun him when he goes for his wide swing. You see, the wide swing he uses leaves him with the most frames where he is open, opposed to his vertical swing. So what I do is trick him into swinging, where I keep my distance so as to when he's using it, I can use the Deku Nut midway to stun him without getting hit. After which, I jump slash him to get some damage in. This turns out to be the winning ticket. While I don't stun him every time, it is consistent enough that I have a steady amount of damage I'm dealing, and while I do die once, on the next attempt, the king finally falls. Now that was painful. For a boss I was expecting to straight up stop the run altogether, it was surprisingly not too hard to beat once I got the strategies to do so, but even so, it was tough. While a lot of the fights so far have had central gimmicks to beat, this was just pure sword fighting. And it really just brings out the simple beauty of the combat in this game when you have to do such a limiting challenge. But anyways, after the king falls, he gives you the Elegy of Emptiness, and now we can climb our way to the Stone Tower Temple. Now I always hear people complain about the difficulty climbing this tower, but personally I have never really had a problem with it. And before long, I make it to the top, activate the owl statue, and use the Song of Time to save. And this leaves us with one more dungeon before we can go to the final boss. Now we finally get to the final dungeon of the game, Stone Tower Temple. Now this is by far the most difficult dungeon in the game, and I mean that should be a given, being that it's the final one. Now the two main mechanics in this dungeon is using the Elegy of Emptiness and eventually flipping the dungeon. Now the Elegy of Emptiness is mostly just used at the start to enter the temple and to do a puzzle right at the beginning in this switch room, and it does become pretty mind-numbing. After having to use the Elegy of Emptiness over and over again over multiple attempts, it started to get on my nerves. But moving on to the dungeon itself, it's pretty difficult. With multiple high-level enemies along with a bunch of ways to take damage, it doesn't take too long for me to be reduced to a single heart. In fact, it only took me 13 minutes. And on top of all of that, this is also the longest dungeon in the game, meaning it will be an endurance run. Now as I progressed, I avoided opening any chests that would contain stray fairies, and while doing so I accidentally missed this chest, which has a small key I need, leading to me becoming lost and looping back around to the main room, where I die to a bomb chew. After going through the Elegy of Emptiness marathon again, this time I do a lot better at avoiding damage, and better yet, actually pick up the key. Now I can enter this room, which is probably the most annoying room in the dungeon. Here you have to reflect light into these mirrors to charge them up, eventually getting the light to reach the end of the room to clear this sunblock. Now this sounds easier than it actually is. For one, there are a lot of the black bows in this room that will try to jump at you and disrupt you while you're charging it. And even worse is that they can respawn, meaning that you really have to time it right. And the second problem is that the controls are a bit finicky when I'm using my PlayStation 5 controller, because, yet again, it does not have notches. This makes me have to either perfectly line up before I reflect the light, or carefully move the controller stick so it lines up with the mirror, which is really hard to do because the controls are very sensitive. Now, other than all of the annoyances, this room has really nothing to offer, and there's barely any danger in it. So after some dangerous Deku flying, I make my way over to this platform where the door to the first mini-boss is. Now the first mini-boss of the Stone Tower is the Garo Master, a surprisingly easy boss if you just pay attention. Now you can't do any damage to the Garo Master unless you first avoid his attacks, and yes, you have to avoid it, not block it. After avoiding it, he'll either become bewildered at the fact you could possibly avoid it, or teleport away and try to attack you again, which is also easy to avoid as you just run forward. Either way, after he's done his attack, he'll basically just stand there waiting for you to attack him, so the strat is pretty self-explanatory. Avoid attacks while guarding just in case he hits me, and then jump slash and guard. We rinse and repeat this until he falls and gives us the light arrows, but not before he blows himself up. Now we have to get back to the entrance of the dungeon to flip it with the light arrows. Now on the way back to the entrance, we have to fight an Igor, which I did not know a strategy to beat at first, so I just used light arrows on him until I realized that regular arrows probably would have worked. The method to kill him is pretty simple though. All you have to do is get close, which tricks him into slamming the ground and exposes his weak point, after which we just shoot him with an arrow. After flipping the entire dungeon, we now have to make our way over to the next mini-boss for the boss key. As I make my way through the rooms, I eventually make it to these two room flipping puzzles. One is pretty simple, just flip the room, run across as Goron Link, and then flip again. But the second one is tedious as hell. First, there are constant respawning choo-choos, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because here I can stock up on my magic and arrows, but it's a curse because they will always aggro to you as soon as they spawn. Now this is annoying as this is a good old block pushing puzzle, where you have to push this block to the other end of the room, flipping the room along the way to progress. Now it's not like this room is very difficult or I lost any attempts here, but it's just really tedious and slightly annoying to deal with every single time, and I just wanted to complain. Now the next room is yet another fight with a Wizrobe, but this time it's actually somewhat difficult. Now the actual fight is the same as the rest, but the part that makes it difficult is that balls of lava are falling from the ceiling and they will hit you, making it much harder to avoid damage. And this being my first attempt, it did not go well. I get hit pretty much right off the bat, and after getting to phase 2, I immediately get hit and die. Now, this may seem like it is one of the biggest roadblocks in the dungeon, and one that may ruin my sanity just like Wart did, until I notice on my second attempt, the lava only falls onto half of the room, meaning the other half is safe. This makes the fight that would test my determination to yet another pushover Wizrobe. After learning this, I just sit at the entrance where I'm safe and shoot Wizrobe whenever he appears. In the next room, we have a bunch of Poes, and even worse, in the side room there are a ton of Death Armos, who slam into the ground as soon as they detect you under them. Now, I need to go through here to pick up a small key, so I found the best way to get through here safely is to just run. As long as you're moving at all times, they shouldn't catch you off guard, and this seems to work basically every time. After grabbing the key, we fly on over to the other side of this room and enter the final mini-boss room. This boss is probably the most difficult enemy in the dungeon, and it's the Gomez. The aim of the game here, just like with the Garo Master, is to play defensively. You want to get rid of the bats with light arrows and then wait to attack after it swings at you. While this is the general idea of what to do, my first attempt ended up being far from perfect. For some reason, I thought you also had to deal damage using the light arrows, and this got me into a situation where all of my magic got depleted. After that, I tried breaking a pot which had a heart in it, and it healed me. Now on my next attempt, I switched to the usable strategy of using light arrows to clear the bats, wait for an attack, and then counter. This ends up working very well. Now in every attempt before and including this one, I always bought a magic potion which I intended to save for the dungeon boss. But now I just start to use it here because I run out of magic halfway through this fight. I could also try to kill some bats for magic drops, but that isn't nearly as safe. Now on the second attempt, I end up killing the Gomez and getting the boss key. Now with the boss key in hand, I glide on over to the other side of the room, where while trying to get rid of the Death Armos, I end up dying. Now this specific Armos is really annoying as it blocks the switch to spawn a chest that we need to hookshot to get to the boss room. So the best method is to flip it with light arrows, hop on over to trick it into slamming into the ground, and then hop back before it deals damage. However, on my first try here, I thought I could just block it with my shield, which was a huge mistake. After another failed attempt due to Gomez, stemming from me just being stupid and hesitant to use my magic potion, I make it back to where I was with a measly quarter heart. This time, I successfully avoid taking damage and hookshot up to the roof, where in the next room, I met with yet another Igor. Now this Igor is a bit different from the one before, as this time it has a laser beam attack that I was not prepared for. Trying to use regular arrows, I end up not dealing damage, and right after I switch to light arrows, I get hit and die. Now, this death was more because of me panicking rather than this being difficult, especially because we can use the exact same method as last time to kill it, so all you have to do is just get close to it to trick it to slam into the ground, and then attack it with an arrow. After a few more deaths due to Gomez, I finally kill him, and now I am starting to get a feel for the fight, meaning I can actually get past it with a lot of health left, only for that health to be depleted immediately when I try to kill the death almost blocking the switch. We do eventually get back to the top level, and this time I use the same strategy to kill the Igor, keeping to the sides so I don't get hit. After getting slapped by a stray pot, I make it to the boss door and enter. The boss of Stone Tower Temple is Twin Mold, which is technically two bosses. This boss is two giant centipedes that will roam the room, going in and out of the sand. Now, the only weak spots they have are the tails, and fun fact, they are actually weak to opposite elements, meaning that the blue centipede is weak to fire arrows and vice versa. Now, the intended way to fight this boss is to use the Giant's Mask that we got from the Igor earlier to just swipe at them until they die. But because we can't use the Giant's Mask, we have to use the good old arrow method. Now, the dangerous part of this is that because you have to focus and aim to hit the tail, it leaves you open for the other centipede to swipe in and hit you. And if you get hit, it takes a whole heart. Not that it really matters right here when I only have a quarter heart, but as I try to line up a shot on the blue centipede, the red one swoops in and hits me, killing me. The attempt after that also didn't go so well, with me dying yet again before killing one of them. Now, a few attempts later, I finally get back to the boss room, where this time I am locked in. I play very defensively, only trying to line up a shot when I see both of the centipedes are in the ground, and even after getting hit once, I do get rid of the blue one, which makes the fight much easier. Now, even without any magic left, all I have to do is stay alert and hit a few shots. After quite a bit of time, I get down to what I think is one hit left, and I see him charge at me, where in my mind, I thought he was going to the left, so I rolled right, only to find I was bamboozled at the very end of the fight. And one hit left and a point where I should have easily been able to survive, I made a really stupid mistake that cost me the attempt. Not going to lie, this hit me really hard. At this point, I have been attempting this dungeon for nearly 10 hours, and 6 of those hours were in the same day. So after I calmed down from the crushing defeat, I took a break and went to work, and decided to come back and try again the next day. On the next day, I wake up feeling ready to try again, and after once again running through the dungeon, I get to the boss room. This time, I lock in, avoiding all the swipes and hitting all of my shots. Before long, the first centipede goes down. Now, with the last one alive, I cautiously run away when it swoops at the ground. After just barely avoiding getting hit here, I line up and take a shot, and the centipede dies. And finally, Twin Mold falls, giving us the last boss remains, and at last, we have all we need to face Majora. After all this time and what feels like 100 resets, I can finally confront the final boss of the game. So now all we have is just one more roadblock in our way, just one more fight before I can call this run finished. After playing the Song of Time for my final save, I start the new cycle by preparing for the fight. For the fight, I'll need max magic, arrows, and a magic potion, so I go ahead and grab all of that before playing the Song of Double Time to skip to the final night. Once we hit the final hours of the last day, we mosey on up to the top of the clock tower and confront Majora. After playing the Oath to Order, the 4 giants stop the moon, in which Majora gets pissed and heads into the moon, waiting for you. Now, because we don't have any extra masks, we can just ignore all the other kids here and run straight to the one by the tree, initiating the most difficult and brutal fight in the entire game. Now, Majora is split into 3 different phases: the Mask phase, the Incarnation phase, and the Wrath phase. This, along with Majora being the most difficult boss in the game, makes this fight into a marathon of balancing resources while still having to be extremely focused as to not get hit. And being the final boss, he hits decently hard. Basically every attack Majora has will do a heart of damage, with the only exceptions being some of the whip moves in the Wrath phase. Now, the resource management comes in the form of arrows, as it is the safest way to stun Majora in all 3 phases. So I have to make sure I have enough arrows throughout the fight, as if I run out, I just have to reset. Now, there is a refill for 30 arrows in this pot here, so that brings the total amount of arrows to 60, but as you'll learn later, I always have less than that. Bringing us back to the actual fight, the first phase is against the Floating Mask. Here we have to get behind Majora to hit him with an arrow in the back, which will stun him and let us attack. This is by far the most tedious part of the fight, as it is really hard to get the arrows to hit when Majora will do basically everything in its power to make sure you don't get a single shot in. This essentially means I have to try to find the most optimal time to shoot, as if I shoot blindly, I will be wasting arrows, which I can't afford to waste. Now, after doing that 3 times, the boss's masks will come out and start floating around the arena. Now, these aren't really much of a threat, as all they do is shoot energy balls at you occasionally, which can be blocked as long as you're locked onto Majora. In the second part of the phase, Majora will now use a fire beam attack, which is great as you can deflect it to take down the boss remains and damage Majora himself. As long as you keep locked onto Majora the entire time and use the fire against it, this part is the easiest phase, and the phase usually ends without any problems. Now I would say the real fight starts in the next phase, the Incarnation phase, or what I like to call it, the Goofy Ah phase. This phase is where Majora is the most sporadic, running around the arena erratically and randomly using moves as he sees fit. Now, all of that being said, there is only one move Majora has in this phase that we are worried about, and it's this energy ball spam. Now, it may seem like this can simply be guarded while he does it, and I would say that's true 9 out of 10 times. But that 1 time out of 10 is the worst and most dangerous part. Now, I say this because even though it seems like these can easily be blocked, sometimes it just doesn't work. Now, I don't know if this is intentional or just a mistake on the hitboxes, but occasionally an energy ball that should have been blocked will hit you, and I still have no idea how it works. This leads to me just hoping and praying I don't get hit every time he uses it, because there isn't much else I can do against it. You can also see here, right at the start of the phase, before I could even lock on, he hits me with one of them, making me lose a heart. And right after that, he went for it again, making me lose yet another heart and bringing me down to my last one. In this phase, the method to damage Majora is to wait until he starts to do a dance move. So basically, anytime he starts spinning, kicking, or whatnot, line up with the direction he's moving and shoot an arrow to bring him down, opening him up to a jump slash. Now, the rest of the phase was going pretty smoothly. I was getting consistent hits in, and he wasn't going for the energy ball attack much, until now. Here you can see what I was talking about with the terrible hitboxes. Even though I was guarding this attack, unfortunately one slips past me and kills me. Hello, editing me from the future. I forgot to record this, I thought I did, but I actually did use a save state here. And I know I said I wouldn't, but the only one I used is right before the boss fight, so I didn't have to do all of the setup again. I swear, the setup is like 15 minutes alone. There's nothing to actually do. It's just getting items and waiting for the moon, and then watching a ton of cutscenes. So I'm sorry that I used it, but all it is saving on time, because I didn't want to sit through a stupid ass cutscene for 15 minutes just to fight the boss another time. So anyways, I just wanted to say that. Back to the video. On the next attempt, I get hit a few times yet again due to the terrible hitbox. But this time I do eventually beat the phase. Now, the previous phase is the one that takes a lot of arrows. In fact, it is the phase that uses the most arrows, and it is the one that is the longest to beat, as the starting sword is doing a fraction of the damage the game is expecting of you. In fact, it takes about 15 stunts and jump slashes to finally beat the phase. And at this point of my attempt, I did not have the best timing with my arrows, leading me to miss a lot and having to refill in the middle of the fight. Now, this point is where I refill my arrows in every attempt. I essentially stun Majora once and then run over to the pot to refill so I can have enough for the rest of the fight. But if you take a glance at how many arrows I have right here, it's not pretty. I keep on missing shots and I end up using so many arrows that by the time I make it to the final phase, I only have 4 arrows left. The final phase is also the most difficult part of the entire fight, and is the one with the most dangerous moves. Here Majora has a whip that reaches pretty much throughout the entire arena. The strategy for the fight is to hit Majora with light arrows to stun him, after which we rush in and get a jump slash and a normal swing in, after which he will jump away. After getting Majora the first time, I mistime the next shot and get hit, but after that I consistently stun him before he uses a move to hurt me, until I run out of arrows. Now without arrows, I'm fucked. The only real option for me is to try to get close to swipe at him, but while doing so, I get kicked and killed. This is why arrows are so vital for the fight. If I use too many in the phases before this, I can basically kiss the attempt goodbye. After a few more attempts, I get back to the final phase, in which I get hit by the most infuriating bullshit move that Majora can use. And it's this grab. If you are too far away from Majora when he jumps away, he will try to grab you with this whip, which is unblockable, and if you are in the right range, it will grab you and throw you, taking away an entire heart. This move constantly made me question whether or not I should keep on trying. It is that bad. The only way to avoid it is to switch to Zoralink and use his barrier when you get grabbed. But if I do that, I won't be able to stun him at all anyways, and it makes the possibility of getting hit way higher, so it's not an option. So the best way to deal with it is to just hope he doesn't use it. That being said, because I got hit with it here, I die yet again. So after another set of attempts and countless deaths, I make it back to the final phase, and this time I have more than enough arrows and full health. This time the fight goes really smooth. I only get hit once and I actually use the full 2 bars of magic I have. And that isn't actually a problem, as Majora won't dodge your arrows as long as they are set to light arrows, even if you have no magic left. So I can continue to stun him. Now eventually I get him down to low health, and I know this because once Majora gets to low health, he will start sending out yet another annoying move, the spinning tops. These will not only lock onto you, but also come from behind and hit you, so you can't block them with your shield. And lastly, after a while, they fall over and explode. So these things are essentially the biggest roadblock between me and completing the run. And even worse, if you don't stun Majora, he will spam this move and send out so many tops that it will be impossible to avoid them. And this is actually exactly what happens in this attempt. Once the spinning tops of Doom come out, I get absolutely thrown around. First when I went to stun Majora, and second while I was damaging him. And after he jumps away and throws more out, it doesn't take long for me to bite the dust. Now this really pissed me off. It seems like every time I feel like I was getting close to the end, something comes out of nowhere and gives me a good old dose of reality. And after this attempt, I decided to take a break. Now during this break, I actually learned that Zoralink can be used to stun Majora in the first phase of the fight by using his fin boomerangs. And this honestly is a game changer. This phase is pretty easy, but it is by far the worst and most boring part of every attempt, and it uses so many arrows. So with this, I can finally save on arrows and get the phase over with quickly. Even with this, it seemed like I was getting nowhere. While I consistently got through the first 2 phases, the last would constantly kick my ass every single time. And after countless attempts and hours on top of hours of nothing but getting my ass handed to me, I was starting to lose hope. But the key word was starting, meaning that there was still a part of me that believed I could do this. That being said, I was starting to get really tired, and I had to leave on a trip that evening, so I only had about 2 hours left of attempts before I had to leave. So after, once again, getting past the mask phase with ease, I then get through the goofy AF phase without getting hit, making it to the final phase with full health and plenty of arrows to spare. Now after numerous attempts, I have learnt the timing of the light arrows and become way more aggressive with the stuns. This grouped along with Majora not going for the grab move when he could have, I make steady progress on the fight. But unfortunately, I get hit not once, but twice by the whip, making me lose a whole heart. At this point, I was considering resetting, but I decided to stick with the attempt. Now unfortunately, I do get hit again by the whip, but it wasn't the grab move, so I still had a heart and a half left. I also run out of magic here, which again is not a bad thing, but it is something I take notice of, because after countless attempts, I have learned that Majora starts to throw out the spinning tops once I use the 2 magic meters up. So at this point, I start getting really aggressive. The move Majora uses to summon the spinning tops takes a lot of frames, and because of that, I can stun him right as he lands, only giving him enough time to summon 1 top. And from here, I was getting pretty lucky. Moves that could have hit me while I was trying to stun him missed, and I did eventually stun him when a top was getting summoned. On top of this, the top died immediately, so I didn't have to worry about it. Once again, I get lucky and he doesn't spawn a top, giving me free damage. But on the next move, the top unfortunately hits me when I was desperately trying to jump slash Majora, which was a stupid move on my part. Now at this point, if I get hit by anything, I die and once again have to reset. And on top of that, Majora jumped pretty far away, meaning that if he summons a top, it'll probably get behind me before I can get close. I get up and the most lucky thing that could ever happen happens. Yes, I actually did it. But what happened? So out of all of the moves Majora can do, there is only one that won't do anything, and that's this taunt. And because I still have invincibility frames, the whip just knocks me down and doesn't damage me. And in this fight specifically, the invincibility frames for getting hit by the whip is extremely generous. So this all combined into the perfect potion that finally, after nearly 40 hours of playtime, led to me saying that I did indeed beat Majora's Mask with 3 hearts, no healing items, limited saves, no optional items, no upgrades, and resetting on death. Now with peace brought to Termina, and with Majora being defeated and brought back to its rightful owner, we can finally roll the credits. And I can positively say that this was the most difficult thing I have done for a game. And while there were times where I hated the game, where I wanted to give up, where I felt like I was going crazy, I am very glad I did this. For a game that I have played countless times, to be able to surprise me and challenge me is something I think is the reason that these challenge runs exist. It made me appreciate the dungeons and bosses a lot more, and this was also the very first time I ever actually fought Majora without the fierce deity mask. After playing the game to 100% completion so many times, it was just nice to be able to experience my favorite game in a new and refreshing way. And with that, the challenge comes to a close. If you want me to do a similar challenge for other Zelda games like Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, be sure to comment it. I would love to do another Zelda challenge and torture myself all over again. And with that, thank you for watching. Here is the obligatory casual outro where I ask you to subscribe and like the video and yada yada yada, whatever. You know the entire thing by now. But genuinely, thank you for watching this entire video. It is a long one, and it was a lot of fun to do, but a lot of work to do. And so if you stuck through this, I hope you find $20 on the street next time you walk to like Starbucks or something. I don't know. Next time you go to McDonald's. Yeah, so this took a lot of work. So again, if you want any 3D Zelda game, I'm specifying 3D because I don't want to do 2D ones. Any 3D Zelda game you want me to do a similar challenge for, please let me know. I will probably do it. I actually had a lot of fun, so I probably will do it. So yeah, with that, I am going to play SMT5 Vengeance now. Bye. Have a great day.